Welcome to your midday NTD News. I'm Emily Ho. David Koch, billionaire, conservative activist, and philanthropist, and one of the world's richest people, has died at 79. David Koch's older brother, Charles Koch, disclosed the death in a statement on Friday, saying, "It is with a heavy heart that I announce the passing of my brother. Anyone who worked with David surely experienced his giant personality and passion for life." David and Charles Koch etched their name as a powerful duo in the world of political finance. They also ran Koch Industries, one of the nation's largest privately held conglomerates. David stepped down from running the Koch organization last year due to declining health. China unveiled today retaliatory tariffs against about $75 billion worth of U.S. goods, putting an additional 10% on top of existing rates, in the latest tit-for-tat exchange between the world's top two economies. The latest salvo from China comes after the United States unveiled tariffs on an additional $300 billion worth of Chinese goods, including consumer electronics, scheduled to go into effect in two stages on September 1st and December 15th. China's Commerce Ministry said in a statement it would impose an additional tariffs of 5% or 10% on more than 5,000 products originating from the United States, including agricultural products such as soybeans, crude oil, and small aircraft. China is also reinstituting tariffs on cars and auto parts originating from the United States. And in Hong Kong, we have some exclusive news. China's leader Xi Jinping giving instructions to the heads of various Chinese agencies in Hong Kong.
According to an exclusive source from the Epoch Times in Hong Kong, Xi Jinping has given urgent instructions to all Chinese Communist Party agencies based in Hong Kong after observing the 1.7 million strong protests on August 18th on surveillance cameras. Xi said, "Whoever caused the problem, solve the problem by themselves. Don't put more pressure on Beijing." It's the most comprehensive announcement Xi has made on the demonstrations since Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement started 2 months ago. The massive turnout was also the calmest so far. Many senior Communist Party officials told our source that they are impressed by the Hong Kong people's actions. Reporting by Eleanor Tsao, NTD News.
A large crowd of accountants in Hong Kong rallying on Friday in support of the pro-democracy protest, becoming the latest profession to publicly back the movement.
A few thousand accountants gathered in the Central District, marching to government headquarters on Friday, carrying signs bearing their demands. Participants said the government could not pressure them into working with fear tactics, citing the recent economic downturn that the authority has blamed on the protests.
Just want to say this. I just want to tell the government it is not a good way to stop the protest. You can't really build fear inside our heart. It is not a good way to stop us. You need to reply for our request.
Another participant, Sandy, said she cannot remain silent anymore.
If we do not speak out today to protect our freedom here, I think this will just put the Hong Kong economy's situation even worse.
Kenneth Leung, a Hong Kong Legislative Council member representing the accounting industry, said the profession would have been very much affected by the proposed bill that sparked the protests, that would have allowed the Chinese Communist Party to extradite anyone in Hong Kong.
The accountants is one of the profession which would be very much affected by the bill if it were passed. So I do think the profession as a whole need to come out and express their concern and grievances.
On Friday night, thousands of Hong Kongers formed human chains in 3 different locations, showing their resolve amid ongoing pro-democracy protests in the territory. Organizers said the Hong Kong way of demonstrating was inspired by the Baltic way, when people in the Baltic states joined hands 30 years ago in protest against Soviet control. Reporting by Eleanor Tsao, NTD News.
2 U.S. lawmakers calling on a top financial regulatory panel to consider direct oversight of the cloud services that big tech companies provide to banks. They say tech firms have become a critical component of the global financial system. In a letter to the Financial Stability Oversight Council, or FSOC, Thursday, Democratic House Representatives Katie Porter and Nydia Velasquez said Amazon.com's Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Corp's Microsoft Azure and Alphabet Inc.'s Google Cloud should be considered systemically important, like payment and settlement services. The letter follows a massive data breach at Capital One last month that raised questions over the risk posed by banks' reliance on third-party cloud providers. Google is disabling 210 YouTube channels that were uploading videos in a coordinated manner about the ongoing protest in Hong Kong. The announcement came 3 days after Twitter and Facebook shut down hundreds of accounts that aimed to undermine Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters. Both companies said the accounts posed as news organizations, but in fact had links to the Chinese Communist Party. The Google security team found that the accounts used VPNs and other techniques commonly associated with coordinated influence operations. Amid the protest, Hong Kongers are also calling for an inquiry into alleged police brutality in past demonstrations, while Beijing is becoming increasingly heated. Raging wildfires in the Amazon could be on this weekend's agenda at the G7 meeting in France after French President Emmanuel Macron called the fires an international crisis and urged G7 leaders to address it. Macron's statements are drawing fire from his Brazilian counterpart.
French President Emmanuel Macron's tweet yesterday causing a stir in Brazil. Our house is burning, literally. The Amazon rainforest, the lungs which produce 20% of our planet's oxygen, is on fire. It's an international crisis. Members of the G7 summit, let's discuss this emergency, first order, in 2 days. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro replied a few hours later. I regret that President Macron is seeking to instrumentalize an internal issue in Brazil and other Amazonian countries for personal political gains. And in another, he added, the suggestion of the French president that Amazonian issues be discussed in the G7 without countries in the region participating is reminiscent of a colonial mindset inappropriate in the 21st century. The G7 nations are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States. Brazil Space Research Center said this week that there's an 80% increase in fires this year compared to the same period last year, and that there are over 70,000 separate fires blazing. Bolivia is calling for tri-nation cooperation with Brazil and Paraguay to control the fires that are crossing borders. Bolivian officials estimate that fires in the eastern part of the country have already consumed more than 1.1 million acres.
It would be insufficient to respond only on Bolivian territory because it would force us to respond in parts of Paraguayan territory and another part in Brazilian territory.
Images captured by the Bolivian armed forces yesterday show a line of flames burning its way across the territory. Cindy Drucker, NTD News.
The former head of Germany's domestic intelligence agency discussed in an exclusive interview with NTD about the Chinese Communist Party's fight against the so-called five poisons in Germany and Europe.
The five poisons refers to the groups of people the Chinese Communist Party has declared the greatest dangers to its own rule. Most affected are the minority groups of Uyghurs, Tibetans, adherents of the meditation practice Falun Gong, democratic activists, and Taiwanese separatists. The Chinese Communist Party fights them not only at home, but even spies on the people who live in Germany. In recent years, we have repeatedly found that in individual cases against people who oppose communist rule were detected, including the five poisons in Germany. This has even led to judicial convictions for people working for the Chinese intelligence agencies in Germany. In its annual Constitution Protection Report in 2010, Germany's Ministry of the Interior revealed that compared to information collection in the areas of politics, military, and economy, Chinese intelligence agencies are acting in a more aggressive way in their fight against the five poisons. Maaßen considers it an issue relevant to all of Europe. I think that the five poisons all across Europe are still being dealt with by the Chinese intelligence agencies in a big way. Reporting by Florian Godowitz and Charlotte Zeng, NTD News, Germany.
South Korea says it will scrap an intelligence sharing pact with Japan, drawing a swift protest from Tokyo and deepening a decades-old dispute over history that has hit trade and undercut security cooperation over North Korea.
Japan's prime minister was on the offensive Friday after Seoul announced it was cutting intelligence ties with Tokyo. That means it won't share information on North Korea.
Unfortunately, South Korea has continued with responses that damage the trust between our two countries.
It's the latest development in a growing dispute between the two countries that's affected everything from trade to diplomacy and now national security. A pact between them was due for automatic renewal on Saturday. It's what allowed them to share intel on the North's weapons program. But South Korea on Thursday said it's dropping that deal. Japan's defense minister has called for Seoul to reconsider, saying that South Korea didn't appreciate the growing threat from north of its border.
Considering regional security, cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. is still crucial.
Reuters' Joyce Lee explains why Tokyo is so concerned.
Although Japan has excellent reconnaissance assets, South Korea is closer to North Korea and can detect launches faster, as well as having great human intelligence. Now, South Korea has said that it will continue sharing information with Japan under a less binding pre-existing deal called TISA.
Under TISA, Japan and South Korea will likely go back to sharing intelligence through the U.S. military. And experts say there's a risk information could be lost in the process. The dispute between the two stems from a long and bitter shared history, dating back to the Japanese colonization of the Korean peninsula in 1910. Japan recently refused to compensate South Koreans its firms forced into work during the Second World War. Instead, it slapped Seoul with trade restrictions, and it spiraled downward from there. The U.S. has expressed its concern over the feud between two of its biggest Asian allies. On Thursday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged them to cooperate. He's been the point person before in talks with Pyongyang. America's main concern is weaker security at a time when North Korea continues a series of short-range missile tests. On Friday, Pyongyang said through state media that it was ready to talk with Washington, but reiterated that the one person they won't deal with is Mike Pompeo.
New allies, Vietnam and Australia, expressing concern today about China's activities in the South China Sea, where Vietnamese and Chinese vessels are locked in a tense standoff in Vietnamese-controlled waters. Australia's Prime Minister was in Hanoi to discuss the issue.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is arriving in Hanoi for bilateral meetings with counterpart Nguyen Xuan Phuc. The meeting comes amid tensions in the South China Sea, where a Chinese vessel has been surveying Vietnam's territorial waters. It's under escort from about 7 other Chinese ships. At least 2 Vietnamese Navy vessels are closely shadowing the Chinese fleet. Chinese ships have been in Vietnamese waters since July. In the first official visit by an Australian leader since the two countries upgraded their relationship to a strategic partnership in March last year, the leaders talked about the standoff at a joint press conference.
We are deeply concerned about the recent complicated developments in the East Sea.
Phuc continued, saying Vietnam will cooperate to maintain peace and security in the region and not use or threaten to use force to resolve the conflict. Prime Minister Morrison likewise emphasized the need to maintain freedom of navigation and overflight, so nations can...
And they can go about that business in a way that is uninhibited and is supported and upheld by the regional architecture and the rule of law.
The meeting drew an immediate response from China's Foreign Ministry spokesman.
We hope the relevant countries can properly respect China's sovereign rights and jurisdiction and work with China to maintain harmony and tranquility in those relevant areas of the sea.
During this trip, Morrison met with Vietnamese peacekeeping troops and went inside a military hospital.
African swine fever is decimating China's pig herds. Bad news in a country where pork accounts for more than 60% of the meat consumed. But the crisis is making room for another industry, poultry.
African swine fever is threatening to take China's favorite meat off the menu. Over the past year, the disease has shrunk China's pig herds by 1/3, pushing pork prices up more than 40%. Richard Craggs runs a cafeteria business in China, serving up 1 million meals a month to workers for the likes of Apple and Volkswagen. But the pork crisis is now forcing him to look for cheap substitutes.
We've switched about 7% of menus from pork to poultry, so whether it be chicken or to duck. And as you can see, we've got some people recipe managing new dishes that are made from chicken and duck to make them more attractive to factory workers, because those price points at the factory level can't move. We can't increase the prices on them.
Analysts say pork production is likely to fall by a third this year and warn that a full recovery is still 5 years away. But pork's troubles are a gift for a different industry, poultry. This farm ships out hundreds of thousands of ducklings a day. The boss, Wang Shuhong, plans to raise output by 30% this year to cash in on the increased demand.
Duck prices should have fallen, but now, because of African swine fever, the price is still strong and will probably rise again. So the market prospects are very good.
So good, in fact, that some of China's embattled pig farmers are now trying to fill their empty barns with ducks and geese. Meanwhile, the new demand for poultry has pushed prices up. Good news for anyone with a stake in the market. But not so much for ordinary Chinese looking to fill up on a budget.
The power of scent, passed down through the ages, this director says the atmosphere in his perfumery brings a little magic to the senses.
Passed down to the 9th generation, created in the same space, steeped in history. Fragrances inspired by the past. This family business was founded in the 1700s by Juan Flores from Menorca, which was part of the British Empire back then. He visited England, met an English girl, they married and bought this house on Jermyn Street. It started as a barber's, but they soon realised their real passion was creating fragrance. Their descendant, Edward Bodenham, works in the shop today.
Very little has changed since the early days. It's very peaceful and it's such a lovely place to work on a fragrance.
Each scent is close to his heart.
They're like old friends, basically, all the fragrances in our range, because I've sort of known them for so many years. There's some sort of magic, I think, in the building, that this kind of unknown ingredient that makes something a florist fragrance.
Creating a fragrance involves patience, sharing opinions, and a lot of smelling.
Yeah, definitely citron aspect, and the sort of the hay.
Yes, but also a bit liquor.
The team also draws from history to inform the present.
Very often we just open the cabinets, look at old books, and find stories, because what people want to feel when they are smelling something is to feel a story, to feel an emotion. So it needs to be something that touches your heart.
Their scents have had a few well-known wearers over the years.
So Winston Churchill here and Lady Churchill, she actually has various double pages in the book, so I think she did the majority of the shopping.
Accounting ledgers show customers like Laurence Olivier, John Gielgud, the Guinness family and royals across Europe and the UK. Perfumes in the shop are displayed in cabinets purchased at the Great Exhibition in 1851.
Even just to be in here, as you can probably feel now, is quite emotional, because it feels a little bit like stepping back in time.
Their signature scents continue to evolve to be passed on to the next generation. Jane Worrell, NTD News.
Scientists in Florida artificially inducing reproductive spawning of an endangered Atlantic coral species for the first time in an aquarium setting. A breakthrough, they say, that holds great promise in efforts to restore depleted reefs in the wild.
Scientists plan to breed new coral colonies that can one day repopulate the Florida reef system. Climate change, pollution, and disease have destroyed many in recent decades. The newly cultivated corals should be stronger than existing colonies because each individual will be bred with characteristics that may be better able to withstand damage. That means carefully regulating water temperature changes from summer to winter and using special lighting to imitate sunrise, sunset, and even lunar cycles that serve as biological cues for the coral in preparing to spawn. The Atlantic pillar coral, which grows in colonies resembling fingers or column-like structures, has been particularly susceptible to disease and is virtually extinct in the wild because remaining male and female colonies are too scattered to reproduce. Corals, a type of marine invertebrate animal, typically live in colonies of tiny sac-like polyps that feed by filtering seawater through a set of tentacles surrounding a central mouth opening. Reporting by Emily Ho, NTD News.
Moving over to Paris, the French are preparing to celebrate the 75th anniversary of liberation from the Nazis.
In August 1944, a giant French flag adorned Paris's iconic Arc de Triomphe monument while joyous crowds cheered in front of soldiers and tanks gathered on the Champs-Élysées, celebrating Paris driving the Nazis out of the French capital. The liberation of Paris consisted of 6 days of fighting between French resistance forces, both military and civilian, led by infamous French war hero General Charles de Gaulle and the German army. Resistance fighters led by Colonel Henri Roll-Tanguy and Philippe de Hautecloque built barricades around the city to stifle German movement. Firefights erupted sporadically across the city. The Germans surrendered on August 25th at the Hôtel Meurice in central Paris. 2 million Parisians assembled on the Champs-Élysées the same day for a celebration parade with de Gaulle marching at the forefront. Paris is organizing various events to celebrate the anniversary. A public parade in 1940s dress will take place this Sunday. There will be a ceremony recreating the moment when Paris firefighters flew the French flag from the Eiffel Tower for the first time after the city was liberated. The Museum of the Liberation of Paris, dedicated to the war heroes that led the city to freedom from the Nazis, will also open its doors to the public. Reporting by Emily Howe, NTD News.
And that's all for today's NTD Midday News. Join us again this evening. I'm Emily Ho.